and tech sector. We are really pleased to welcome you to the next in our series of events. With Ailsa, we are focusing on navigating funding with confidence and all of those elements. A little bit of housekeeping first, though. We are recording this session, so please, if you can keep your mics, feel free to leave your cameras on should you wish. But if you can leave your mics off, please, during Jake's presentation, that would be wonderful. If you have any questions, if you can put them in at the chat, and we will get to them at the end. But today, as I say, we're joined by Scotland is members Ailsa AI, who have secured over 500 million in non-dilutive funding for businesses across the UK. They bring a huge amount of practical real-world insights, which is why we have them with us, and what actually works when it comes to grants, competitions, bids, and more probably importantly, what doesn't. The session today is designed to be hands-on and grounded. There are no silly questions, so please do ask. We have the experts in the room. Use them whilst you have them. It's about helping you turn your ideas into credible, fundable plans, understanding where the real opportunities are, how to approach them, and how to make smart decisions that support the long-term health of your business. So whether you're a very early stage startup, whether you're an SME and you're already growing, I hope, and I'm sure it will, Jake will have some insights that you can take away and apply straight away. So Jake, the man of the moment, over to you, sir.
Thanks ever so much, Karen, and yeah, thanks for having me back. Just to really reiterate what Karen said there about there being no silly questions here. I personally thought up until the age of, I think, 28 that goats were male sheep, so nothing is silly, or at least sillier than that. Anyways, thanks for joining us in the second of this Fundability set of Masterclasses series for Scotland Is. I'm Jake, I'm the head of service delivery here at Ailsa, and I've been in the funding game for around 6 years now under a few different guises. Today, what I really want to do is start at the beginning with how to build a fundable project or set of projects. Now, I speak to a lot of folks who are either unfamiliar with non-dilutive funding mechanisms like grants or prizes or accelerators, or who know them but are unsure as to how to access these. Now, the first thing rather that I try to make abundantly clear every time is that when you approach a funder, 9 times out of 10, you need to do so with the same spirit as a 16-year-old asking their mum for 20 quid, because we all know that the first question they're going to be asked is, what for? And it is as simple as that in many ways when you're looking at pursuing non-dilutive funding. Starting with a general desire for funds rather than a rigorous set of goals, objectives, and milestones that you can use that money to reach is a strategic error more often than not that can lead to a lot of wasted effort. Now, without a specific work plan, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, you can't really accurately gauge the actual cost of the whole pursuit or ensure that the resulting obligations, if you're successful, won't actually pull your team away from the core roadmap in a deleterious way. So starting with a kind of vaguer goal of securing capital, as I say, often results in a reactive scramble like we spoke about last time, where teams try to force their business goals into a funder's narrow scope. And as we discussed in the last session, which you can access on the Scotland Is YouTube channel if you haven't had a chance to check it out, this lack of preparation can lead to inconsistent technical narratives and budgets that don't actually survive the scrutiny of a proper set of eyes, a proper audit. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the different strands that create the cable of a strong project plan. And there are 5 kind of key points that I want to provide a whistle stop through here with. Starting with a modular project plan allows for mechanical, high velocity responses to opportunities. So if you look at deconstructing all of your ambitions for your product, your commercial pipeline, your different activities and routes to market, breaking these all down into discrete work packages, each has its own timeline, resource requirements, technical deliverables, you can start to then create a suite of approaches that can be configured ad hoc to meet different criteria and make you work smarter, not harder. This sort of methodology enables businesses' leaderships to verify the financial logic and technical feasibility of any given proposal or bid with, really high degree of surgical precision. So these 5 most important checkpoints, I think we should all be looking to pass through to equip yourself with everything you'll need to build a robust project application, whatever opportunity might come up, these 5 that we'll be going through today. And we've also, it's just worth saying, had a few questions in the lead up to today's session about the additional or slightly varied challenges that are faced at the scale up stage as well, moving towards applying for tenders and public procurement opportunities. And I want to be super clear that the things that we're going to be covering today are important across all stages of business growth, but they become more and more vital, if anything, as you move to scale to prevent knowledge fragmentation, double work, and any risks of internal mission drift. So I want to start with what I call the Lego principle. Engineering a modular R&D or development in broader senses roadmap is a kind of mechanical shift from viewing your work as one single overarching project or goal to seeing it as a library of discrete interlockable components. Now that approach, I think, is essential for navigating a funding landscape that is really often quite unpredictable, driven by changeable policies and political to-ing and fro-ing. Imagine if you were to cast your magnificent business plan as one slab of concrete, including every goal you'll need in order to hit those steps from concept to commercial powerhouse along the way. It looks great, it looks coherent, it looks solid and strong, but it will be rigid, right? Now, if a funder of any type is only willing to support the lab phase of a drug development roadmap, but not the regulatory submissions, then you're going to have a problem if all you've got is this rigid slab. It becomes really difficult, if not impossible overall, to carve away part of that slab to fit their rules and their requirements. But if you're looking to build the same sort of business plan out of a bunch of different Lego bricks, you can still look for someone to pay for the whole model. That'd be great. But in the likely event you find a funder who's only interested in funding the red pieces, it's a damn sight easier to pop those off of the model and build something out of them that is its own edifice. So why does this matter? I think that by breaking your ambitions into discrete blocks in this way, you get 3 kind of critical advantages as compared to those who don't. Firstly, it's this agility in the assembly process. Different funding calls have different missions and industrial priorities. We'll come onto this later. And if your work is modular, you can assemble specific blocks to perfectly match the specific scope of a new call without rewriting your entire strategy. It also really helps in mitigating what we call the application tax. We talked a bit about this last time, but the hidden cost of grant funding is usually in the internal bandwidth it requires to draft applications, to attend interviews, and then after the fact to actually deliver on that project if you are selected for funding. But if your R&D or your activities are already pre-split into blocks, you significantly reduce the manual labor that's going to be needed to respond to a blizzard of opportunities that can sometimes appear with deadlines of 3 weeks from the point of being announced. Lastly, this really gives you a sense of pragmatism in scope, I think. By that, I mean that large single package projects often carry higher execution risks. It's fairly easy to intuit that if you're asking for £1.5 million, the scrutiny is going to be greater than if you're asking for a few different tranches of smaller funding to do essentially the same work. Smaller interlockable blocks allow you to present a roadmap that feels manageable and credible to the reviewers of any applications you put in, while still working towards a nice, coherent grand vision. So I want to talk about how to make your work plans and your work programs actually funding ready on that kind of 24/7 ready to go basis. I'd like to thank everyone for bearing with the first of what will probably be many laboured metaphors in that Lego piece. But as simply as I dare put it, what you need to do is design these blocks of work programming or work packages with a few fundamental characteristics. So self-contained objectives. Each of those blocks needs to stand as its own clear set of deliverables and milestones so that it can be isolated if a specific grant only needs to cover a portion of your roadmap. Each one needs to have its own beginning, which is usually a question that you intend to answer, a middle, which is fundamentally the stretch of activity that is carried out to work out what that answer is, and an end. Ideally, you come out with a clear answer that, in a perfect world, is going to invite the next question in the series and invite the next block to be put on your model. We also want to have a standardized approach to costings and budgets. Again, we'll come onto this a bit more in detail in a second here, but by having a modular approach, your arithmetic check for any given proposal becomes simpler. You can quickly calculate the SME sort of contribution that you might need to make, the value for money that a specific combination of blocks might represent. For example, if you know that you need to spend £500,000 in total to execute your design, prototyping, testing, and refining phases, that is great. It is a good level of planning, but you're going to have a lot more agility to play with if you can say how much you're going to need for each of those phases. Even more yet, if you can say, for example, we're going to need £15,000 to prototype our first 15 units for testing. Too often, I think I see folks downcast or feeling as though the game is stacked against them because they can't find a funding pot that is the size they need to get everything done. And not always, but often it's the case that there are 3 different funding pots available that they could split that work into that come to the same overall amount. It's really just a case of breaking things down as well as building things up. Now, 2 questions that I think are absolutely vital as we move towards the sort of how to practically budget for a project. You've got to ask, what will it cost to do? And what you're asking for, but also what will it cost to you? We touched in the last session on the fact that funding is never truly free, right? So to maintain a kind of fiscal discipline here, your team has to be mapping the cost of the project beyond the obvious line items that it involves. This again is part of that execution check, basically to ensure that the reward you'll be getting actually does outweigh the operational friction that it exerts. So I find that 85% of the time, the most important thing will be beginning by allocating your people. When you agree to take on a grant or participate in an accelerator, for example, it typically covers a certain and well-defined proportion of your team's time or their salaries or both. Now, in many cases, this proportion might be yours to define, to codify. So if you're applying for a grant, it may be tempting to try and get your lead engineer's salary completely paid up for the year by deploying them 100% on the project that you're applying for at the time. What you need to be aware of at the same time is that by doing this, yes, you get their costs covered for a good long chunk of time, but it also means that they are bound to do this project's work across that duration. No side projects, no business as usual work, no other grant projects, nothing. The golden rule to what isn't eligible in funding is simply the same thing twice. So it's really important to exercise a little bit of caution as to overcommitting folks, particularly the most important folks in your business. And likewise, I think when you know who is needed for what activity and how long ahead of time and for how long in total, you can really start to see which team members might be at risk of being over leveraged across multiple funding ambitions, and which modules in your Lego model might be orphaned without them. You can plan ahead, make sure that you're taking care of your business as usual commitments as well. If you know, for example, your CTO is going to be off the table through the second half of 2027 on a grant project you've been awarded, you can plan to bring in capacity to cover them in terms of new hires or contractors to cover their workload without realizing too late and creating, more of a problem than an opportunity. You just don't want to be making this mistake of double booking yourselves is what it sort of boils down to. And so I think this idea that, time is one of the most valuable commodities is true because it means money and it means a lot, but it is rarely on your side. And I think what will be important here is to start digging down to quantify and divine this a little bit more. So as I sort of touched on there, I think diverted staff time is a real cost that you need to measure for any grant application, but I think it's something that should live as part of this modular set of work planning. If you're pulling away your product owners or your central developers from the core roadmap to do project work, are you going to need to subcontract some commercial BAU work in order to free up their time for the project? Does that ultimately detract from the value of the grant itself? In very fundamental terms, does the amount of money that you're getting given to do X, Y, Z get wiped out by having to pay someone else to do the work that you're obliged to do for your clients? Then we want to think about the reporting burden. Any funding that comes with few strings attached will still have the strings of reporting back, and this can be in the form of monthly, quarterly hours that are required for financial claim preparation. You might have to conduct an independent audit depending on the size of the funding, technical progress reports throughout meetings. All of these relatively small but potential death by 1,000 cuts requirements that are going to take specific members of your team away from what they need to do. You also want to think about cash flow lags. Now, there are loads of great opportunities and prizes and awards that will pay you money just up front. You get given an award and you receive that cash. Grants, particularly public sector grants, same is true of different tenders and bids. They have timelines, right? And sometimes you'll find that these are paid in arrears. So you've really got to map the mechanical impact of carrying project costs. For example, most grants with Innovate UK require a 30% match funding element. So you have to pay £3 for every £7 that they pay towards the project. For Scottish Enterprise, if you're going for an R&D grant, this is a 50-50 split. But the important thing for both is that the grant funding is paid in arrears typically. So you're going to need to be able to foot the bill for the first part of it, for maybe the first 3 months. And starting to figure out what that looks like for your cash flow more generally, if you were to be successful, is something that you can and should be doing ahead of time. Moving on to the kind of elements of practical budgeting here. What does it actually look like when you get down to it? Budgeting for projects is difficult, and it is a combination of estimation and evidence. The question that I tend to get asked more than pretty much any other, aside from maybe "who invited you, sir," is how much money should I be asking for to have the best chance of success? Now, fortunately, as you might expect, this question is a bit like asking how much should I spend on a house. There's so many things that it can and does depend on. 250 grand could be incredible value. It could also be an absolute rip-off. The thing to bear in mind with non-dilutive funding is that most often you are selling, and it is usually a buyer's market. So what we need to do is provide credible evidence for pretty much any costs that you are looking to include in this budget. And that's where we begin. I think the important thing is to bear in mind that while you probably have great top-down pictures of how much money you'll need to get from point A to point B to point C, when we're building these budgets for grants, they typically need to be itemized as precisely as possible, and they need to be built from the bottom up rather than the top down. So you can see labor is nice and foregrounded here. Again, that's because labor tends to be one of the biggest cost sinks that go into grants in a positive way. So treat this as a precision variable. I often see folks come with a general idea of, this is how much our payroll is for a month, but let's try and use actual payroll data and overhead dates, to really start to build out exactly how much 3 months of person X's time is going to be worth based on how much they're paid and how much it costs to keep them working. If you're looking to hire, got to think about recruitment costs and timelines, that sort of thing. We also want to think really carefully about direct versus indirect costs. Right, so you want to really clearly distinguish between project-specific costs, like materials or equipment, machines, consumables, and general operational overheads that are not directly related but are still required to sustain the work. So different funders have varying rules about what can and can't be included. So knowing exactly what sits in what pots rather than estimating it in top level terms will save you headaches down the line. For example, you might know that for your, if you have a data science lead, you know that they have a seat in your office, you know that they need their laptop, their computer, they contribute so much to the utilities in terms of how much power they use. That's the sort of thing that we can start to figure out and have an idea of, so that you can figure out whether, for example, the 20% that Innovate UK offers as standard for overheads is going to be enough. You might also be able to say, well, typically our utilities are X amount per month, but for this project, a large part of what it is doing a lot of electrical testing, so they're going to skyrocket for this period. That kind of planning is, again, really important here. Importantly, I think evidence is the key factor. Wherever you can, be using quotes or historical data to justify any high-value procurement items. The answer to that question that I kind of mentioned, I'm often asked above, is value for money is always the lead here. It's value for money every time, and proof is the way to evidence value for money. So, if, for example, you're going to need a specific piece of mechanical equipment to undertake a project, being able to say where you're getting it from, whether you're getting a discount, and how much it will depreciate over the period of the project, having that understood, what its depreciation per month is going to be, allows you to build out budgets in that very quick assembling the Lego blocks way. If you're hiring for roles, for example, think about salaries. Think carefully about salaries. Don't just stick a finger in the air. Go onto somewhere easy like LinkedIn or Glassdoor that keep repositories of average role pay across the country, and use those to justify how much you're intending to pay someone, whether you're saying we're paying them under the odds, so that's great, or we're paying them over the odds because we need someone who is cream of the crop for this particular piece of work. Likewise, be specific about your requirements. If I am working for an air conditioning innovator, it's not just that I'll need specialist software. I want to say specifically, I need specialist fluid dynamics software, or even better than that, if I can name the package that I use, the software package, and provide its RRP for a 12-month subscription. This is so much more convincing than saying we'll need X amount for software in general. And I think the last thing on this that I would give as North Star advice is that we want to be estimating costs throughout with a realistic view of inflation and supply chain volatility. Most grant providers will be hesitant to ever give you more than you've asked for, although they'll often be quite happy if you end up needing less, obviously. It's an uneven game in that way. One thing that is inescapable a lot of the time is the dead time between applying for funding and project commencement. A good example here is, if you were building a new type of jet engine and submitted a proposal that required 100 tons of aviation fuel that you submitted back in January, costs are probably going to look a damn sight different here in May when you get the go-ahead. Building that sort of foresight into inflation and what might change makes it more likely that your funder is going to give you a little bit of leeway if things change between application and award. So you've got three keywords that I would really sort of hammer home here: categorization, prioritization, and synthesization. Synthesis, whatever. How do we prime these projects? So you've got your modularized costings, your pre-verified library of day rates, overhead calculations. You've got your standardized reporting templates. You know exactly how you are going to be putting forward architecturally these applications. Approval is an important one too. Establishing with your senior team a threshold for the pursuit cost, where a given bid might only be green light if the potential award is significantly higher than the projected application and execution taxes that I mentioned. If you're taking away people's time to put in the proposal and to do the work, making sure that the money that you get for it actually outstrips what they might just be able to do if they were doing the day job is an important thing. And if you can establish a sort of minimum value, it can save a lot of time as to what you go for and what you don't. And what we'll be moving on to next is maintaining some real robust pre-written descriptions of your core technology, of your IP status, of your commercial pipeline, the specific problems your R&D solves, and you want to update this as you continue going. Because this way, instead of redrafting the narrative for each application, you just select those relevant Lego blocks that meet a funder's policy and mission alignments, and then you refine the model. That's sort of all it needs to be. I'm going to sing a little love song for the librarians here. Librarians, admittedly, not usually thought of as the most exciting folks, but you want one, maybe more, on your team if you're going to be applying for non-dilutive funding as a strategic instrument. They are the alpha and the omega of any good project, and I think you want to just think of your overall R&D work as a collection of high-fidelity components stored in this master library. When a funding call opens, you're not inventing a project, you are curating existing assets into a specific configuration. 4 different sort of pieces that I'd really recommend in when you start to build out your library of application assets. Firstly, organization, first step towards velocity every time. By categorizing your project information, splitting technical work packages from financial data or team credentials, CVs, etc., you're going to make it much easier for your various contributors and subject matter experts to locate the specific Lego blocks that they need in the toy box. This just prevents a lot of administrative drag in searching through old folders, ensures that every piece of content is stored where everyone expects it to be, and allows the team to assemble a complex project plan with surgical precision without necessarily needing to go back and ask each other at every step whether it looks right. Towards this point, you want to have really visible and intuitive labeling within your library, just to make it clear and usable for the entire team. If you've got clear signage, it means that any stakeholder from the CFO to technical lead can walk into this digital repository and immediately just understand the purpose and status of any given Lego brick, of any given module. That then means that there's less internal friction to the application process, and that approval threshold that I mentioned, how much does this need to be for to make it worth our time, can go down because you're spending less and less time doing the grunt work up front. The on-call lead for any given project that you're looking to put together can just retrieve the necessary evidence and narratives without needing a guided tour of your full library. I think where we want to divert from the typical library approach is to have plenty of talking, actually, not none. This is to say, I think everyone should get into the habit of asking questions, often loudly, publicly. If something doesn't make sense or if it's not intelligible within this repository of information, let's ask the question and let the leads then focus their energy on high-level peer review rather than basic fact-finding. If you have a culture of active questioning, where, for example, your financial lead is probing the commercial logic of what you've got, while your technical lead defends feasibility, this turns this standard document into a rigorous project plan that is just much more likely to survive the scrutiny of assessors. And finally, fundamentally, the library is only going to be useful if all the books are current. The integrity of your funding strategy depends on regular review and maintenance. If you regularly sort of scrub your repository to prevent the use of outdated or incorrect information that could lead to, a loss of credibility during the assessment, make every module have an owner who's responsible for refreshing their specific shelf on this library, then it just means that everything can be taken as that single source of truth to reduce friction again, because again, time, especially for startups, is such a prime commodity, right? So this is something that I'm going to sort of blaze through a little bit quickly, but you can see a rough breakdown on the left and the right here as to senior team project management priorities on the left, and the real boot in the trenches kind of priorities and responsibilities on the right. Importantly, it's really smart to involve the right people for the right parts of the project, even though that sounds super simple. And in project design, it is more often than I'd care to admit the thing that holds people back. At minimum, you need to be sure that you have technical leaders for each of your project activities, a representative from any other consortium members you might be involving. For example, if you're teaming with a university, we need to know who is responsible for what at that university and where they fit into this cohort. Because really, most funders are looking for certainty and clarity. They have a massive appetite, usually I find, for technical risks. For grants in particular, the support is really just meant to be there as a subsidization of you taking a technical risk on something that's not a straight putt. Funders are betting on their funding being the thing that enables you to take a chance on something that you might not be able to justify otherwise, with the reward on their side explicitly being broader socioeconomic benefits, something that makes it worth the cash that they put in. Operational risk, though, that they've got no appetite for. They don't mind a project failing because what it sought to achieve turned out to be, impossible or just way more difficult than is worth pursuing. But if a project fails because it was not adequately scoped, risk analysed, or budgeted, that'll get you on a hiding to nothing pretty quickly. So this last section, I want to kind of take all that airy-fairy stuff and go into some examples of what this might look like using an example. I want to illustrate and figure out how we can look at measuring once and cutting twice. And yes, I do mean it that way around. So imagine, just for now, that you're running Boeing, right? Be a nice place to be. Well, maybe not at the moment with jet fuel prices, but you get what I'm saying. So to build a credible project plan for a complex innovation like a new aeroplane model, you're going to have to translate a lot of high-level ambitions into a chronological sequence of technical work packages. So say using your library, you assemble the first phase by pulling together the design and build modules, those Lego bricks, those are the ones that you'll need. These focus maybe on CAD modeling and airframe assembly and aerodynamic simulations. But by having all of these things predefined, your technical lead can immediately present the resource requirements and timelines for the initial structural engineering phase. This then eliminates the guesswork for your CFO, who can look at the budget that you've got for specialized materials, aeronautical software, see how much it costs. It's already verified within your library and can be plugged in. And then the lead engineer is on call to verify that the build phase actually adheres to, sort of original design tolerances. This is so much quicker than trying to start from the top and move down. So then say, for example, you have another set of Lego bricks that build out that prototype and testing stage, building a subscale model wing section for stress testing and wind tunnel simulations. Again, these are all activities that you're going to have stored as discrete modules with assigned leads, and the team can then verify that you're passing along this technological maturity timeline will do, with clarity and with clear validation markers. This shows funders that you're not just building a plane, but you're executing this rigorous engineering process where each test reduces the overall execution risk for the project as it goes on. Each of these blocks, as you can see, can be standalone or be assembled and configured in different larger packages. The point is you've measured all of those blocks once, and now you can cut and cut and cut again without fuss, depending on what a given funder wants. It's basically having the same characters but different stories being told with each. You can tell wildly different stories with a project plan that is designed to be versatile from the outset. When you start with a set of modular projects you need to do, rather than finding a call and trying to think of a project that might fit that call, you can access a whole different level of efficiency in applications and really start to play that numbers game intelligently. So give you some examples here. Say, for example, one funder here is looking at supporting green skies, decarbonisation and net zero. So if they're focused on transitioning to a low carbon economy, you can pull out the modules from your library that, in the example of this new airplane, talk about the propulsion and energy storage. You're not just building a plane in this story that you tell. You are developing a flying laboratory to test the integration of hydrogen fuel cells in long endurance airframes. So you know that from your library, you'll need to know everything about the fuel cells, the wing design, thermal management systems. And then if you're able to prove a reduction in CO2 emissions as compared to traditional engines, that's a project. You put together a project that takes something that might not have been standalone and presents it as a coherent story. Say, for example, we're looking at a funder who is interested in regional connectivity and logistics. If a funder's goal is to improve infrastructure or connect isolated communities, you can pivot to the payload modules of your work plan for this airplane, or autonomous flight. Say in this story, we might be saying that the aircraft is a critical logistic tool for the low-cost delivery of medical supplies and cargo to rural or island regions, right? Again, you pull out the right blocks here. It might be heavy lift cargo bay design and short takeoff and landing capabilities. And you then prove that you're able to operate safely in, high value payload areas with small runways, stuff that you would need to be doing if you're developing this plane for a broader commercial context anyway, but you can find a very specific home for a niche of project work that can sit in it. One last example for fun, I suppose. Say, for example, you have a funder who is interested in the implementation of AI in advanced manufacturing. If this is it, you lead with the data and iterative software components of this airplane. Say in this story, you are building an edge computing platform that uses real-time telemetry and AI to enable predictive maintenance for planes. Here you take out everything that you've got as far as sensor arrays, machine learning for flight stability, and you probably want to make a digital twin for the airframe that you're going to be using during the build phase anyway. That can all be funded here as its own special story because you're developing precision and reliability metrics for the data generated during flight trials. I know that was all a little bit full on, but hopefully it's a good illustration as to how the same fundamental building blocks can be used to build entirely different models that open up unexpected routes to funding and different funder priorities. And yeah, I mean, between us at Ailsa, we've written more project plans than we've had hot dinners, to be honest. I think where our talent lies is that we know how to make sure that the first project plan that you build is always the most effort that you'll have to put in. Everything dovetails after that quite nicely. And yeah, my hope is that you can take a little bit of an unfair advantage away from this session today and, just get a little bit closer to your fundability goals. But thanks for listening to me waffle on. I know that it can be a chore, but I do appreciate the time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate that. We want to make sure that the forum is open to ask any questions you like. I think we'd spoken about this before. There is no silly question. You don't know what you don't know, and that's why we have the experts. So to enable you to ask freely the questions, I think we're going to stop the recording there and we will put the presentation